Chedan Soki Chonam La Chanchu Pardo Dani Kapsanse Bage Jin Soki Pe Chonam Ki Dola Penjira Sange Ndo Barasho Sange Chedan Soki Chonam La Chanchu Pardo Dani Kapsanse Bage Jin Soki Pe Chonam Ki Dola Penjira Sange Ndo Barasho Sangye Chedan Soki Chonam La Chanchu Pardo Dani Kyabsanje Bage Jinso Yebe Chonam Ge Rola Penjire Sangye Ndu Parasho Simchen Tamche Dewa Devi Gyudang Dembara Gyuchi Simchen Tamche Rungaji Gyudang Tawara Gyuchi Simchen Tamche Rungame Dewa Tang Mindawara Gyuchi Simchen Tamche Nirin Chadan Nidan Tanyamlan Nebra Gyuruji Simchen Tamche Tandewe Gyudan Dembara Gyuruji Simchen Tamche Dungal Dan Dungal Gi Gyudan Tawara Simchen Tamche Dungal Mebe Dewa Dan Mindawara Gyuchi Simchen Tam Nirin Chadan Nidan Tanyamlan Nebra Gyuruji Simchen Tamche Dewa Dan Dewi Gyudan Dembara Simchen Tamche Dungal Dan Dungal Gi Gyudan Tawara Simchen Tamche Dungal Mebe Dewa Dan Mindawara Simchen Tamche Niren Chadan Nidan Tanyamlan Nebra Gyuruji Simchen Tamche Dewa Dan Devi Gyudan Dembara Simchen Tamche Dungal Dan Dungal Gi Gyudan Tawara Gyuchi Simchen Dungal Mebe Dewa Dan Mindawara Gyuchi Simchen Tam Niren Chadan Nidan Tanyamlan Nebra Gyuruji Sajbyoji Juji Mendodram Jirani Nyele Yambandi Sange Jindu Medembuai Dokenanda Jinlai Chibarasha Idam Guru Rana Mendala Kanya Atayami.
Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This ground spread with incense, adorned with strewn flowers, Mount Meru, the 4 continents, and the sun and the moon, I imagine as a Buddha land, and by offering it to you, may all living beings enjoy this pure land. Thus, meeting the teaching of the peerless teacher is due to the spiritual mentor's kindness. I dedicate this virtue for all living beings to be cared for by excellent spiritual friends. Ram Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryata Yami.
Kange tujingi zungwa tawa tamche pampe chiri tampe chuni tunze de kodam te la cha za lo. Ya ta chunju ki liu gepa samdang ki liu. Tangwani yaor muje shibuji ne chimbuchi sungda. Chanju semjong na ne dajen nyamje ki lo jangye yuna mena de chunju na la. Chidana chunju lu yonsu zopa ta liu chazang chanju semjong cha de yorde. 다 다진 제베 냠닌 책임지기 또 리우투파 즈베 리우테당 리우예파 아니 something 기루데 시우드네 첨부질 타오르스 베 something 거르스 까난기도 와다 겨르무지 다즈민 고르다치 잘데부지 숨고 말한 거예요 내수도 숨고하래 된디 니가랑 아랑조이나 가서 툭툭 때라 삼당 양양도 삼당이나 아니 곰나네 초대 제곰들이 제곰나네 제곰지 아버지 제빠이 아버지 맞아 수지길에 양따바지 마시나 조금 제가 지사코랑요 말했더니 심이 곰기게도 심이 되기도 하대는 라본라보래 심이 기부 주나 거르 닝집은 되기도 되는 라보래 미좀 돼야지 마다 깨게요 말해 뭐야 내수디 아니 란진진께 진진진기 연대 되게 때 상무당과도 제바체 타르토바도 제바체과도 빼미스럽게 좀 자디었다 와다테 시분이 내 침보래 와다테 제바체 상무당이나 뒤쳐대야 내 라보진 로야요래 시분 내 침보래 제곰도 쪼르다 날렌지 개비 진주 양답을 제게나 제금도 쪼래 조금 뭐가 rezerv고 말다 제금 양답이 옆에 토라 조금 때는 야부차고래
카레 야부차기를 샤마타 조금
제금 물랑은도 손에 조금 답에 리제네 때 수소 제빠전에 제배 타르더라 애니 찌지도 때가라 냠버자야 돼 조금 쓰디가라 지네 지다 좀 하자 템포도 비야돼. 아니 제바기니 제비 지자면 되겠지 조금 째다 심이 고미게 받은 라보레다. 투밤에 배곰전데 라둠 잘안 잡한다서 중다.
라 카레
투밤에 배곰전데 라둠 잘안 잡아다. 누구에게 라바 둠둠지 잘안 자나? 잔자 투야 요마라. 누구구구하러 컴페테보다 강가에 빼대강을 리잘야보구구하러 아니 근데는 잘한자 두구러 다살라 왔다 투밤에도 곰게가는 라둠 잘한자가 나버려서 송대 아니 제바제야 수수 빼 퇴바 삼바 공바 퇴성공순 야마도도 저거다 빼미스베 내쯤버다
And so this, in particular, this 8th chapter of the Way of the Bodhisattva is an incredibly crucial chapter in regards to what is contained within this chapter. His Holiness the Dalai Lama again and again points to this particular chapter in this very text. For this chapter really encapsulates the practice of learning to take the shift in exchanging self for other, meaning shifting from the focus of importance on self to the taking equal importance, but shifting it to caring and considering for others. And this chapter in particular completely covers all of the aspects from which we can approach this practice. It really completely covers this practice of how to make that shift to the altruistic attitude. And so, as again, His Holiness again and again points out, for the practitioner, chapters 6 and chapter 8 are extremely important when it comes to our practice. And His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, tells it like it is. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, would never mislead, would never trick us, but rather points out the actual reality of what we need to focus on. And therefore, as His Holiness again and again is pointing to these chapters, and again in particular chapter 8, when it comes to the exchange of self and other, we should again and again analyze this chapter and think about the trainings again and again. And so when we're engaging in such a process, this is what is called analytical meditation. And if we don't put some thought into this, if we don't analyze what's being said really with self-reflection, really going into it and looking for personal reflection on this, then actually within our mind stream, like real meditation on this, real understanding of it can't, like real analytical meditation can't arrive if we don't think about it. But actually what will be is just like cats who in a daze of contentment sit there and stare off into space and purr and purr and purr. Very static. There's nothing going on. They just happily purr and purr. And we'll be just like that, dull, staring out into space. So in order to bring some dynamic to our meditation, to our analytical meditation, then we have to put some thought into this. So it's not just a static, dull stillness. We have to think about, really consider, what are the problems? What are the faults with being self-concerned? What are the benefits when we turn around and simply every act that we take is for concern for other? This is an incredibly important point. We need to analyze, we need to think. And then we can properly have analytical meditation. And due to our analytical meditation, the actual practice then will become easier. We will easily be able to really take up the path of concern for other, exchanging self for other. And we should know that this was the principal path of practice of all of the great Nalanda masters, was to analyze these points. Not to say that there was not like resting meditations such as shamatha, single-pointed, like resting meditation, not to say that there wasn't any, but in order for that to go along well, one first needed to understand the reason, the reasonings behind it. So first and foremost, principally, was that analytical meditation. So to bring about stability in accomplishment of the practice, this all relies on the foundation of analytical meditation. Without a foundation of analytical meditation, there's nothing for, there's something lacking that prevents the accomplishment to come forth. So it's compared to within the scriptures, it's said that meditation without the foundation of having rationally analyzed is like trying to climb a mountain with no hands, no fingers, no hands. How can one ascend the side of a mountain without fingers? And how can one enter into proper, authentic meditation without having analyzed the foundational points? And so to analyze is so important. To process this again and again from all different directions. And so actually that's the complete when we first learn, have personal reflection, and then meditate. So these three processes of taking in the information, processing the information, and meditating on the information are very, very important. And most important, if one can do it, is to bring those three into an inseparable union.
Tendi indikalata yundu chanchuki sem jongdara yongayala ran chinzin genge cheda ran chinzin la kyondul taya yin chinzin jena kigi yo inza yinzun tangdulane kompeldo tangwade shun ne ke chimbu chadi yores.
And so for the purpose of conditioning ourselves, training again and again, so that we have bodhicitta arise in the mind stream. This is a process of us pointing fault where fault is deserved, which means our own self-centeredness, our own self-cherishing, and then doing what we need to do so that the flip side, the altruistic attitude and caring for others, increases. So that these two, the self-cherishing starts to decrease and the caring for others begins to increase. This is what we do to train on arousing bodhicitta.
Subject de la kerche di lamna dire kazan dajen jene jroa nyam sulem betse simondu cheba de subject nimba de tere simondu cheba sem sedugala tuba ishi derwa tuba ishi khorang ge megi lumaten lumaten chadiore
konda kare lumaten
semde ngatu gi semde sem rando ni cheba ina semde lumaten gawa mare migawa mare Chazanta ran chinzindang, zinzindang, any nyomung chingi sem dan day on the gala, sem de migawa chagore. Chambadang, Nijidang, Midabadang, Chanchuki semdang, Tongi to be sheraptang, tending dot sem den day on the gala, sem de gavis sem chagore. Chaza Dajen J. Sidigalata, Dajen J. Sani, Matu sem de gavishola katangi sungorwa. 미국을 졸라당 아주 바장은 배운게 다 토마 매번 단다 버도용 배 아주 란진진의 공부 슈충보래 렌진의 공부 슈충보래 라진 제나한테 공부 왕게 티게 릴라요래 로아 뭐다 띵디가라 라진 제그 돈다 하고나양 고 감감 슈슈기 때니 미국 샘게임 그래 미국의 샘게리가라 디 체동아도 모셔봤잖아요. 애들람상 고 도와 고찰 매서와 살쪄 봐서데 매서와 미게 셈데 셈매서 저 투야요 말 셈직인데 미게 셈데 매서 투야요래 미게 셈 코랑 게 미게 lumatan 인두가라 펜네 대섬 딩고 말아 셈랄도니
라 건다
펜네 셈랄도니 미 lumatan 인두가라 고 펜네 대섬 데두고 말아 안 된두고 말아 Pembachi go mare nodan keltu mare. Miga than day on Dugala, neke gore. The Gavadan day on Dugala pentogor, tatri. Tindula, Nupachin is some day, Mazoyadan. Any mig kang, a Gavadan day on Dugala, pentoya some day, any pay, Suzum what Muzimbigone kept compelled to Tanguaya. Tishe gore, that day, Nambijun Tishe gore.
So before we get started, let's just briefly touch base on where we left off in terms of these categories within this 8th chapter and subcategories of what is the focus on those particular verses. And briefly. And so briefly here, we're speaking about the mind, like the practices and how the mind falls under influence when in regards to accomplishing something. And what we have to understand about the mind is the mind itself remains in a neutral balance. The mind itself is in a state, in itself at its basis, is in a neutral balance. However, our tendency is to fall into egocentricness, self-cherishing, the notion of a true and substantial reality. And these are things that are negative. So now, under the influence of these, we now have fallen out of the balance of neutrality into negativity, into non-virtue. Whenever we're speaking or coming from a place of egocentricness, self-cherishing, the delusional perspective of seeing things as true and substantial as real, non-virtue. But love, altruism, bodhicitta, compassion, the wisdom of emptiness, whenever those are arising in our minds, whenever we're acting out of those places, then again, we're out of neutrality, but now we're into positiveness, we're into virtue. And so we understand that there's neutral and there's virtue and negativity. When we speak about this shift of exchanging our caring for ourselves for the equal caring of others, this is virtue. We're back into virtue. But we fall so naturally and easily into negativity, into protecting our ego and ourself and so forth, because since time without beginning, this has been the conditioned default that we have been running on, and therefore we have tendencies, karmic tendencies or karmic imprinting to do this. Our karmic imprinting is naturally leads us into self-centered attitudes and really fixating on a true reality. But our habits and tendencies can be trained. They can be changed. And when we familiarize and have repetition in new conditioning, then we can create new habits. Then these new habits will be easy for us. They will become like second nature. And so non-virtue naturally is just easier for us. So the moment we find ourselves in a non-virtuous thought and in a non-virtuous negative state of thought, word, or action, then we must reverse this. We must turn it around. We must destroy it and eradicate it. This is what we're looking to do. And we can do this with non-virtue because remember, non-virtue is not innate in the mind. The mind is a neutral base. The mind itself cannot be destroyed, cannot be obliterated, cannot be eliminated, but the non-virtue within the mind can. So we recognize the non-virtue and we work to eradicate it. And then we understand that the neutral space of the mind also is neutral. It's neither beneficial nor is it harmful. And so, it's neutral. But what we want to do is increase the beneficial part of mind. So we eliminate the non-virtue part. The neutral is the neutral, but we want to look to increase and encourage on that which is beneficial, and that is virtue. So we slowly eliminate the negative and harmful, non-virtuous mind states, while recognizing virtue, hold on to that virtue and look to increase it further and further. And this is something that within Buddhist philosophy, within the scriptures of Buddhism, this is really a primary part of practice. This is spoken about again and again in the Buddhist texts.
What up? Tela Jibene, Ugopa Tarche Pass. That simply Ranchinzinda, Dinzinda, Tendi Wang Gana, Numunki Gora. Numun, some Hachang, Ugobache, the Lungagi Chupa, the Palme Bachagore. What up? Tedi Ran Lungagi Chupa Tart Palme the Gunga, Sim Gopuchachung and Ranchinzinde, Meazores. Cartin Meazorzana, Maranto. Jenchinzilla Yunden Tong, Ranchinzilla Kundutong, Tadum Pachang and Bewangi, Tende Jenchinzilla, and Be Jendinjibi Yaladon, want to care to go Maris. Ranchinzin Kunjine, Jendinjela, Jendinjela, also Nyamni Abuji Chetugo Maris, Tanda, Hakonang Chetugo Maris. Then Mituade, Ranchinzin Kunjigo, Rati, Tindugala, Tendigi Lunga Gichacho, Gopal Chen Jizade, Ranchinzin Chigurta, Ranchinzin Jasha, Pacha, and Tikiti Chigores, Lenzin Pacha. What are the Meazores, the love Gorta? Can't Ranch Numunching is Semde, Meazores, the Tartunatri. Numunchin Semde was a Kungigore, Numunchin Semdi, Meazores, the country Tizigore.
So if we look at the process now, so we're saying that negativity needs to be eliminated and positivity and virtue needs to be encouraged and increased. Then we look at the process of this. When we're coming from a mind that is colored with egocentricness, and with really fixating to things as true and real, really holding tight onto situations, then this causes emotional upset, negative emotions. When we're under the sway of emotional upset, then we act out in ways, verbally, physically, act out in ways where we've lost control. And we're not in control of ourselves anymore. And our words and actions really show this. This really plays out into our words and actions. And so the behavior of our words and our actions come because our mind has become controlled with emotional upset that has come from the root of self-clinging, come from finding this, looking at the situation from the perspective of the situation of hard and fast and true. And therefore, we're controlled. And then we act out in behaviors that very much represent that we're controlled with emotional upset. So how do we turn this around? How do we dissuade this upset and persuade virtue? It really starts with seeing how good it is for us, how good it is for the situation if we're more concerned about others, and how this influences us so that we're not influenced by these negative emotions. And seeing the quality of being focused in another direction, not in the direction that afflicts us, and seeing that there is a perspective that we can take that we're more prone to affliction, and that is caring so much about ourselves, protecting ourselves, self-cherishing, egocentricness, being all self-concerned. And so, basically, this points to whenever we're involved with accomplishing others' purpose, we're shielding ourselves from these mind states that will lead us into emotional upset and lead us into action and words that we're not in control of. But how are we going to take up accomplishing the purpose of others if we don't know about it? If we don't know the benefits, if we don't know how to practice that? And so we recognize that coming from, so we also need to know how to practice and why to practice accomplishing others' good, caring for all others. So we should understand that the situation that we're in now, falling under the sway of emotional upset and influence in terms of our physical, our actions and our words, this is something that we have strong imprinting for. The imprints are very strong, but we should understand that it is the mind that is full of afflictions, afflictive emotions, that basically is our undoing. This is why we say and do negative things. Basically, if we want to trace it all back, what does it come down to? A mind that is full of negative emotions, destructive emotions. So negative emotions are our problem. It is a problem that affects us very, very, very much. And this is what we must trace back and understand, that we are affected by negative emotions that are traced back again to self-centeredness and a mistaken perception of things as true and real.
Semrabdu Majua, Lemsang Zurumuda. Semrabdu Majua, some trooper chapa, some Naldo Mineva Chickenjilla, Yomola Gorva. The young son that ranchins in Yongore, Zembers within Yongore. Chazan ranchins in Domgo, the Pemis will catch Muchagua. Nimpujiniani on the Sundota, Juvala Chantune, Kora the Korek, the Kametusungo Marta, Kokuzenji and Sungore.
So this is really important, a point to reflect on, to think about. And then actually you yourself can put it to the test. See what it's like when you're angry. Just notice what's going on inside when you're angry, and you'll see that there is disturbance in the mind. You've lost your peace of mind. The mind is agitated. One cannot settle into just a peaceful or natural state. You're in a state of upheaval, very actually mentally disturbed. That's what anger is. Then there's no peace of mind. There's no settling into just a natural way of being. We're agitated, we're upset. That's what happens when anger takes over. And so, and then when this happens, then we're really looking at things. Then we're again in a very restricted state of seeing things very much from this self perspective. And so there's no room for anything else, a self perspective and true fixation on the reality of what's unfolding around this upheaval. So, very much not a good situation to be in. And that's why Shanti Deva is not running us in circles with these verses about the practice really being altruism, taking this egocentric attitude and having a brand new focus of caring about others. Shanti Deva is not running us in circles, but what Shanti Deva is doing is giving us the very antidote to the problem. And we must rely on this antidote and understand that, that this is the antidote to this like mental disturbance.
Random baji la sore nimi se de random baji ta ranchin sing kyung ma de sungdo su ranchi po ge de di kyun de kare re se de wata tela gore
Di sabche nipa rebege
sabche nipa de la sabche sumyorta
laso
random baji tuba torwas jinden le jurwas ta random baji che de torne jinden du res 젠던 레잘 오그레스
Mhm.
티 뒤던데 용구도 왔다 또 양겨다가 란친진 견단 렌친진 연된데 시야래
Mhm.
어다 두시제는 숭도 야니 양도 숭 코네 쯤부 인자
Mhm.
가르비철라 넨덴즈데 빼 고코 여바 인자 데 넨덴지는 숭고 왔다
Mhm.
다 가자 니미 삼네 란템 바지 torwa sidigala 란친진 이견데 돈에 와 중알 말이 다된 돌린 중들 계산 로서 솔로게 야다까지 내지나네 오 대섬당 거다 중알 탐제 다 대발은 더발이 중으레스 다 대화생는 소소 기부증네 란친진 지nenbe 시부지 제가 지금 와르데 토마 멤버 단나버도 코로네 레르와 란돈 중니께 개버 중민도와 란돈 중투민도와 오 다티 디게 에네페 란친진 뭐슈 첨보체바이나 에니 케란 랭감 뇨몬께 그래 뇨몬티 왕게 레사 그래 레드 와티 왕게 에네페 루말께 그래 자타티 숭고어
Mhm.
근데 인디갈라 란친진 tor고 그래스 그 동안 더기면은 란친진 tor고 그래 자타티 숭고어 인규
Mhm. Mhm. Lasso dene sabche di rangdung bashik ki dondakdria nyemik di
어
chik
님이 삼네
dene nipa di shendun jorwa
젠들나 저와
la jorwa dene sumpa
숨바 리던 땡이게 돈다 리니 숭양 양교를 란진진 현지 다 전진진 연된데 리디진 숭고어 다들이
lasso. And so now where we'll enter into these verses, we're entering into a new section where in section 2, there are 3 subcategories or 3 subsections, where the first one is seeing the downfalls in mistakes in accomplishing only your own good and really only looking out for yourself in this world and eliminating that, renouncing that. That's the first within this category. Then the second is having renounced simply focusing on your own agenda in this world, now taking up caring for the good of all others. That's the second. And then the third is briefly reviewing again in a nutshell advantages and disadvantages of different perspectives of either being egocentric or altruistic. And then within the first category, in the mistaken ways, the problem, the mistaken way of focusing on oneself, when you only, go out and look to achieve your own agenda, what this really accomplishes is only suffering. Just as it said back there in the same chapter on like 129, 130, 131, in that area, those verses again expressed that all suffering comes from the wish for accomplishing your own happiness. And all suffering comes from trying to accomplish only your own happiness. So what's happened? Basically, that's what we've been doing all along. And until this very point, here we are in samsara, right? We're still subject to all of these samsaric difficulties. Have we really accomplished our own ultimate purpose up to this point? No, we haven't. Here we are still in samsara because our focus has been accomplishing our own agenda, our own good. That's been our main and principal, focus in this life. But on the, so if, that's what accomplishing our own good gets us. It gets us the situation where we're influenced by negative emotions. And therefore, we get negative emotions, we get emotional upset, we say and do awful things and create karmas or actions that are just negativities. And due to these karmic actions, they ripen and mature into more suffering for ourselves. It comes back. So in the end, all that we accomplish through focusing on our agenda is our own suffering. And therefore, we have to think about that, because it's not what we want for ourselves ultimately. And because it's not what we want for ourselves, we have to think about how to get out of that cycle of affliction, upset, negative karma, suffering. And we do that by eliminating that through thinking of the faults of this really suffering cycle.
오다 빼게 침부로도 텔레쇼로가 니용도 오다 텔레 돈다텔라 에림페 쇼로가 야자 두주 지구다 린주 탐바데 용거다 이 돈다데 섭제 코란 돈다데 지나 간체 란진진기 견사야데 란진진디 좀 구레 이 란진진디 마좀이나 란진진 마이나 뇽모케 레사그레 둥안징그레 세승고레 이 라데마데 둥알마데 라덴들 중세야데 따티치디기 따따땡용도 이디수 돈다지 버레다 치기 데브저만다레 모도 돈다지 버레 오다 다 진전의 저와 시디가라 따티 바게 계산 친구만에
Geshe-la, the temple, the sikje gyadang dukchu katsu la?
두주를 구다 둔주.
Oh, la so.
아까자.
Yeah.
님이 선에 란돈 버지 들어와시게 돼 삽제들이. 오다 때라 그상 로터겨데 띵이들도. 다 진전의 저와텔라 아니 가서 둔주도 두주리지도 둔주 탐배 깡파 땅분이들이.
올라서.
되니 깡파 치마니다 둔주 던지 되게 젠던을 저와싱이 차래. 젠던.
젠던기 저와
젠던을 저와다 젠던 투부레 젠던 자와다 제고 그래스.
카바고 tsukire sikje 카발라 고 tsukire.
둔주 탐바게 깡파 치마니다 둔주 던지. 솔로가.
Yeah. Okay.
다티게 가르세고 알아잖아. 젠던 제다 가서 답에 자데 말이 젠던 덜린 중세 중도 아카상 솔로가 야나라. 야다 가서는 지나라. 제가 대화 기부 세데 젠던을 되는 중레스. 제가 되니 니글라 젠던 제거래 란진진 가서 냐와 티거래 젠던을 지고래 젠던 전에 야보래 젠던 전에 상기 고방 두그래 했어. 다티 그제 돈다 닝부디 디디 때시고래. 딱 뭐네 전에 계산가망에 라교 다티 디숨디 티데페 양양도 지나서 로진툼나 빼 미스베 펜도 용해래. 삼당과래. 지된 대화 찡에 빠떼군 자된 덜린 중스 지된 나라 딸 지된 대화 칸데지나 자메데 인다 뇽 나란서 뇽몬 찡기 뇽몬단 데데게 자치기 거와지나 디게 가서 제시 대화 징거와 디에네 진 진진제 젠라 펜도 젠라 펜바타 두치니 대화디 용거와 딘디가라 다 딘디기 배 지된 대화 찡이 받는 다된 돌린 중 지된 동안 찡이 받는 진 라된 돌린 중 망도 신이 지지자 배 망부 셰마셰 요 마레스 답비 지자긴스 투바랑 게 던지다 투바싱 지바랑 게 던지다 투완싱 게 던지빈 닝인기는 개발돼 지바시들 한진진 슈 중부 여기 소수지부 삼당근에 지바스 라브레 투병원 보기냐면 샤기 결보대 얘네 젠든지는 상기 버레스 다 그런 게 지양 사다 라브레 다 페티나진레스 이니 다 딘주들 가르다 다데셴기 동안고 양다 셰버 마규르나스 다 랑 진진 로데 torche 진 진진 로데 진진제네 데디 마제나 가르현카리어레잖아 다데 쟁기 동안 엔다 제발 마기미나 상기 니죽 칠 상기 고방생데 토베야 요마르다스 누구 말레스 아니 니겐 캬버토에 세르숭도 코로나야 대화메즈 코레는 데이나 대화 til 루잠제 라야 요마르스 코레나 동알 마데 코레 란징기 동알기 란징 젠지 차디어와 코로나에 대화메즈 다 저도 숭도 어떻게 로진 토잡 수수 원달라 닝고 버제니 니 세마타도 테삼당기나 시부 펜도 용거래 시부 셈나 디키테기래 맞아 빼자데 말로 왔지 아니 에 돈다 주니 삼로 마다제니 미좀 되나티 홈양다 반로야 카브레 딱 갑수이지 나소르지 백백으로 니로나 나소 되기도 안 하죠 나도 신데나 나소르지 되기래 이나 사조용 말에 사조용에라 단다 니도 삼당 거래 양내도 삼당 거래 세셈은 교회 전부도 그래
오케이 디스보도 디니기 콜라 카레 송펠라
니로는 좀보 탕체교도 나서고 와라
네네
르 셈르르 차 류르르 차그와
네네
어떻게 너 신데나 집이실 나서르지 되기래 르르 차그래
네네
풀라 팽 말에
라서
녀몽 땐 메가살라 란친진 동거래 아니 개위 초 양답지용라 진진진 공패도 땅거래 띵아서 삼진도 제거마도 마첼레 용해요 말 레신데 자와 제바보지 자우 제거로 와 자와데
And so we're speaking about the verses that are dedicated to this subject, to this first in the three, which the first was the downfall of acting solely for our own purpose and the need, the necessity to destroy that attitude. The verses that are dedicated to that are 169, and just so you know, we won't read them here, but 169 and the first two lines in Tibetan, I believe in English too, of 170. So that is effectively focused at that attitude, destroying self-concern, the need to do that. And it's because what we're looking to do is destroy the very root of what, this self-cherishing attitude that brings us upset, that is the impetus, and then the negative emotions, then upset, then negative karmic action, and then suffering. So we have to destroy that. Therefore, we need to get rid of it. So that's 169 and the first two of 170. Now, the second subcategory of now turning to caring for others as dearly as we care for ourselves, or altruism. This is the 170. Geshe-la, so the last two of 170 and all of 171. And basically, and so we went over this last week, but what is being said here at the end of 170 and all of 171 can be traced back to, again, those very three key verses that I mentioned earlier, where it says that all happiness without exception comes from accomplishing the purpose of others. It comes from altruism. It is the source of happiness. And so it's the source of our happiness, even our daily, our little like pleasantries and happiness, all the way up to the accomplishment of Buddhahood. And again, so there are 3 different verses back in 120, 129, 130, where again, then further on, the next verse says that all the happiness in the world comes from altruism. So if we want happiness, it will come from accomplishing the good of others. And so this verse says, all suffering in the world without exception comes from the wish for our own happiness, and all good and happiness in the world comes from accomplishing others' purpose. This is what more is there to say? And then further on, it says that this is whether one is a mature being or an immature beings accomplish their own good. And this is the difference between immature beings and the Buddhas. And so, basically what our biggest problem is this self-cherishing. And so once again, we look at the virtue and the good and altruism and the faults and self-centeredness. That's the difference between selfish beings and Buddhas. And there is no happiness to be found whatsoever in samsara. And so Geshe-la says that these 3, so maybe before I continue on, I don't have my Way of the Bodhisattva with me, and I'm hoping that someone there does, and you can read these 3. You can recite these 3 for us now. If you go to 129, I know Janice read them last week. I don't know if Janice, if you're there today. Yeah, it looks like you're there. So it's 129, 130, 131 is, I believe.
129. All the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. All the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. 130. Is there need for lengthy explanation? Childish beings look out for themselves. Buddhas labor for the good of others. See the difference that divides them. And 131. If I do not interchange my happiness for others' pain, enlightenment will never be attained. And even in samsara, joy will fly from me.
Thank you. So Geshe-la said, expressed, really with emphasis that please memorize these 3. Please memorize them. Please write them down and put them in places where you can read them and remind yourself about them again and again. Because this is how the thinking, this is how, in any place at any time you can recall them, they're memorized, and you can bring them up in that situation for yourself. And this will be the direct cause of future happiness, because you can redirect your thoughts and emotions at that very moment. And therefore, this will bring you happiness. You won't have to read them. They'll be there. They're a resource for you. But Geshe-la emphasizes, if we don't read these verses and refer to them again and again, if we don't think about them, then, how are we going to be able to bring them into our meditation? How are we going to be able to bring them onto the path and any kind of a practical application? So it's really important that they're embedded. The words of these verses are embedded in our mind so that when we meditate, we can we can call them up and we can meditate on them. Because Geshe-la says that, meditation isn't just the process of closing your eyes and, just, being peaceful. There needs to be something dynamic happening within the meditation. So think about, the way you feel when you lie down to go to sleep at night, and you begin to like fall off and drift off to sleep. There's just kind of this, like, can be this blankness, nothing happening. That's not what we want in our meditation. We don't just want to be resting and sleepy like right before we go to sleep. That's not what we want. We want something dynamic happening. And in terms of that dynamic, what's happening internally, mentally internally, is that there's a process happening so that ego is being kind of eliminated and reduced. So non-virtue is being reduced and virtue is increasing. So that's not a neutral, static meditation. That's something that's very dynamic. And that's what we need to be happening in our mind. And so therefore, we have to have the intellectual understanding of why ego, a strong sense of ego is not good for us, and a caring and concern for others is. So understanding this and having the verses memorized will activate our meditation in this positive response.
다 도스레 다 돈디데 다 돈디데 찍받찍하네 인주 쇼로가 야단 딘주 땡이다 야단 딘주 뜬숨데 돈디데 뜻숨도 다 가르숨 거래 위온데 갈라 딘주 땡이게 돈다데 티레 마란조 란친진다 란친진 슈 첨보 젠데나 아니 레사 겨왕마 레 mambo사니 냐와키 텐디지 누갈 mam부뇽그레스 텐디네 란 텐디 니글라 누갈데 만데나 란친진 토르고레스 아니 소소 기 랑라 아니 베 젠가와 랑데와 그거 분숨 서바지 용하데 젠친진진이 용그레스
젠가와당
젠가와당 랑데와 용야데 젠친진 젠타 장주기 셈다 잠바다 니시곰네 아니 텐디 용그레스 대소 아니 베 땅둘랭고레스 텐디갈라타 위오나 때때는 띵이는 뒤누고래 시보트 nempun두와 따때 시 뉴뉴진이 셴나 텐디지레데 딱 아주 냠nen째고 저는 아주 곰배왕을 란진질라 슈 전부 곰바여래 매주째고 말해 란된 까니지는 아무무 슈슈고 뚝뚝그래 젠텐제 라페 뿡쿠탕 잡아지 갈칼니 리 자가나진 찍으러와 빼깔려와 젠텐제라 드니 되가랑 아주 젠텐제라 배고야데 빼 미스베 깨치 모래 어다 그산 삽제디나 떤다두나 란진진 현대 진진진 연된데 시기도 어다 띵두가라 빼 미스베 거디나 디 삼당된 박 윈겐이 숨구여와 nga마 tepe kangali yoti kala nyingla pe nasa tangtang burdo samtang gores di pe chik tabotezo de haku gores di semna pengires yingi sumguye ngumare te
karigi nyingi kola ani
tanda chi tape chi dezo ngazo tanda pe
dodogi chikte
chi didi tonda dini tendenge chi ningjubong teki go shuloga yada tezu samdazi dina tini porze dedo sampe mambutang gore ningla naza tangtang bordo samtang gore tezu samdang ningla naza ta tangyo mare peja gore
laso
peja gore ta
laso
mazu ningla sam naza tangtang bordo kali gemna tangurwa peja gore tezu samdang ningla zumu ngure ta labgo marta yang kale de teni jab gore sung gore samro mangbo tang gore teni semle pengire sungdu pingone ngacho lo mangbo sam tang gore jima jijinji de shigo marde sem to so ngamale samro matang kabe semle to so kibe zugdo pendo do keranza jiba ngira ngama samro mata da ju chunjun jal samtangni tosu kebra semla tenden pendo jungore ina chunju yonsu soba shigire besen kabure
Mhm. And so now verses number 172 and 173 are dedicated to the third category, which are to bring it all together concisely. This need to exchange self for others, the need to eradicate the ego clinging and to develop altruistic caring. And so what is being said in 172 and 173? Well, specifically in 172, it really speaks to the fact that for someone who is very egocentric, a strong sense of self, what the cycle tends to be is that due to this strong ego clinging, is that there's emotional upset, negative emotions, negative karma accumulated. And in the last life, for example, even in former lives, due to ego clinging, negative karma has been accumulated, has been committed, that will lead one to a future rebirths in the hells. That's what happens. That is the cycle of things. If due to ego clinging, we create negative karma and are reborn in the hells, there is much pain and misery. And therefore, if one doesn't like pain and misery and suffering, then one needs to then turn to the enjoyment of altruistic attitude, where one turns this around and focuses on care and concern in this world for all others through attitudes and minds of bodhicitta and compassion and empathy and love. This is what needs to be taken up. So if we want to head up this problem at the pass and not create this negative karma that's going to lead us to suffering situations, then the very heart of what's to be done is to take up bodhicitta, love and compassion, caring for others. And so here in these verses dedicated to this particular subcategory, it's expressed in few words, but it's really the heart of what needs to be done. And we should know that once we get used to this, actually it won't be hard. This will just become like second nature. It will become natural for us. Going out and acting in the world where we're coming from a place of serving others will be the default that we run by. It will be love, compassion, and bodhicitta. It will be accomplishing the good of others. And then climbing like this ascent of a mountain. What used to be difficult, like climbing a mountain with no hands, will be the ascent of a mountain that becomes like second nature. In the beginning, it is not. It is like having no hands because we are not accustomed to it. But in the end, once we accustom to it, it will just be what we do, and we will be ascending that mountain with all the best gear possible. And so how do we get to that point where we're ascending that mountain naturally, where we're accomplishing the good of others and going about in this world caring for others naturally? Again, knock down the self-cherishing attitude and build up altruism. And to do that, we always have to have it in our mind. We always have to think about it. We have to bring it about wherever we go and whatever we are doing. And again, the very heart of this all goes back to what we read here just a few minutes ago on verse number 129, 130, and 131. That's the heart of it. This says everything that you need to know. And you should work at it the same way you would as if you went to the doctor and found out, for example, you had heart disease, and the doctor gave you exercises and remedies that you had to take to turn around your heart condition and get healthy. You would keep doing it until you were healthy. And in the same way, we turn to this heart advice over and over again and rely on these antidotes, rely on these new lifestyle choices, so that we combat our like we would a heart condition, our negative mind conditions. And this is something that it is going to take a little time. So we have to be in this kind of for the long run. It's going to take some years to turn the tides around. The tides were strong in one direction, and now we have to turn them around. But think about, since encountering this very profound text that Master Shantideva has written, think about all of the strategies and techniques that it has taught us to be happy. Thought about the happiness it's even brought us up to this point, and how much more that it can bring to us. And it's difficult to know it all inside and out, Geshe-la says, but encountering this text can bring happiness, has brought us happiness, and will continue to bring us happiness. And so we really have to commit ourselves here to these practices.
Rajan Jene, Juranyam Sulimbe, Simondo Chebadala, subject Jinan, Ta Sumpadre.
Oh, that's all.
Sumba. Ta Susu Lula, Lui Canita, Gyung, Nebayangorwa, the Dulani Tajataya, Jepatia Sungore. Tela, Carlo, Cho Mishiba. And Tela Sumje, Luigi. Nepal tapa de la sumje, cho mishibe nepa, yome pe nepa, mung pe nepas.
Okay.
Nepasani kyonre ta.
Lasso, ani chog mishepa di.
Cho mishiba zerta ngazu lule ze kwe nemal soba sammeja de nga gunde de nga cho junio marwa.
Lasso.
Oda tenigi kyonjije.
Nipa di kare sumpela.
Yome pe yo. You use it, use your what a tenigi young you Ramine going so that the two or Lilo Kumapochi. You are mapping a bus. Any momping a mishibi, nepa.
Oh, Murphy. Oh,
What a mompa mishiba.
okay.
Ta cho mishibi nepa de la Lila sipping a bajitan, Lila chapatal chattering a bus. Chatter ombriba. Sepa zena sepata sepan docharwa. Chapa docha. Ani luletene be sepa prea kyonji ores. Tendi sepa de chatal chela hom gugres ta hom ribas hom gugres.
Karela gom gore.
Lule chatal chapa the telea.
Oh,
What I sabes Chomishi never the last Nijene. Ta Lula sepa paving about the tambo this sungore. What a tailor? Sologai gather dingy tenji battereta. Gather dingy tenji batte. That thing when it catch him botang, around to Luis the Shiragi. Where you are the chair Gugurwa. What that? Ya, Lula Hajang Jene, any be Sepapelina, Digi, was the one Jingidua. Then what you togorwa. Chilter, Lundini, Yonsu, Yomor Cheguba, 대살달라 신도니 제리 제리 쟁규 니투 뚱 세즈 스무도 다 대가르잖아 다 나랑저 다 가르소래 루이라네 하장 그 제대지네 답에 제대지네니 제 꽤 넬만라서 바다베 시우지 땅도 랭겨와
La.
제
Ze.
루이기톤 달라페 제기톤 칼리갸고레 구기톤 달라 칼리갸고레 캄바 네말 캄발라서 바텐데 게 칼리 시우지 갸고르데 이 광게니 베 루이라니 루이게 루이레 세바 망보 끼네 요스 꺄겨르데 아니 딱 오늘 대화 데 마두비체네 아니 둥알 망보지 데 있겐지네 둥알 아니 베 망보요 둥알 아니 베 처음에요네 가르치네 아니 베 둥알 춘춘지 미저베지 미 제리첸지 차그레스 제리첸 제디가라 가르라고 그래 서로 하장 겜보 렘사 둥알 춘춘지 저 미투겐 아니 베 미지기 티질라네 티 코랑나 말라나 젬바지를 라비나 데스 나라구두 선데 코네 니베 수수 셈투 용도 제리첸시디가라페 서로 하장 겜보 서로 넘보 아니베 둥알 미타간질레 제리첸 레고레 근데 차그레라 버레 이거는 누가 란테 용해야 돼 용사디 지타디 란친진다 덴징기 첸이 용거다
And so now we enter the third of like going back into like a broader category of subcategories or major categories. We go into the third, which was to look at some of the faults, problems, mistakes committed that are related to our physicality, that are related to the fact that we have and act out of this physical body. And so, you know, there are like certain categories also within that in terms of this physicality. For example, not being contented. So like never having enough, you know, our body craves more and more. Also the faults connected to the necessities that we try to provide for ourselves, and then the negativities that are created just out of not knowing, kind of like of an ignorance, a dullness, simply not knowing state. And so, you know, looking at the you know, we have like not being satisfied. So within having this physicality, we have craving for things. We become like really craving of certain things, and we become attached to these things. And so attached to certain things. And so it's really important that we develop mindfulness and meditation of that aspect of things, that we get attached to the things that we like and that we crave. And so, you know, we have to have a mindfulness and meditation practice around understanding what we become physically dependent and craving and attached to. We have to have a real awareness around this. And so this is very important. But we need a body. We do need like this physical body. So it is something, you know, that the body has needs, and we have this physical body that, you know, this is the situation. But we have to understand, if we begin to crave things, like if we need things in such a craving way, we have to understand that in itself is the cause of our own future personal suffering. So we have to really see the connection between craving attachment and suffering. And so that's where we turn to verse number 174 in 8th chapter, where it says, to the extent this human form is cosseted and saved from hurt, just so to that degree it dwindles to a weak and fretful state. So what's being said here? What can we read between these lines and read from these lines? So we have this body, but then we begin to really take care of it. You know, we have an obsession around protecting it and taking care of this body, where we show a lot of concern about providing ourselves with the food that we need, the things that we need, a house and shelter. We really begin to protect ourselves because of this body. We need to build things around it, the food we need, the house we need, the clothes we need. And we really end up, you know, being in such a kind of a protective cocoon of needing and wanting all these things that we actually lose strength and resilience. You know, as it said here, it's cosseted, it's babied. And due to this, you know, we actually can't bear anything but the happy little protective box that we've created, and we become very feeble. So that when some small thing comes up that's not in this little protective, you know, box of care, we can't handle it. We've actually made ourselves become very feeble. The littlest thing sets us off, the littlest thing we can't bear. One little change, one little difference, one new thing, or when someone, you know, reproaches us on something, we become so feeble that there's no resilience, that automatically when one is so sensitive that one is very, very reactive and feeble, due to this process of surrounding ourselves and caring so much for ourselves in a particular way. And do we have other translations for 174?
Sure. The Wallace translation is, the more this body is pampered, the more fragile it becomes and the more it degenerates. And the Batchelor translation is, to whatever degree I take great care of this body, to that degree I shall fall into a state of extreme helplessness.
kanchi tartuna luila hachang sepa ki tape kendi chigio marela gorda sepa pelagi kendi chigio marela gore ta luila pe kyondol ta gore de lugi chenenga zo yundenje yorwa chochik bu ke samdaye marwa
Lasso.
ludengi chane tape yang zansane samdaina ludendi thoni pe gewatune sangi kopang duya yorwa 달주니가 같아서 삼당에 도와 초니가 삼당 거래 이게 번에 쓴다 류는 달달 통매가 달달원나 류숭자를 숭도 경기스탄이 찬일 따이나 류는 라나진 통구였나야 류는 돌기와 말에 류숭구레스 가르잖아 류티 다는 류센디 돈이 달와게 저러주서 밀리름 보친데 빼 미 레파단데 그 류센디 돈이 상기 고방 두야 열와 초니가 삼당 거다 경기 전에 삼단에 견데 못초베더니 경기 전에 견데 망고버지지 연den데 삼단데 디 돈이 연den이 차템지 쭉 투버지다 미 남자 뜻든지 고거라 랭인제 투버지
And so as that's the case, when we pamper this body and just give it everything it wants to protect it and make it happy and comfortable, you know, we see it's the problem. It really becomes very weak and degenerated. And therefore what's being said is that we shouldn't indulge it in all its cravings. We shouldn't just give in to all of these cravings and just pamper it and indulge it. We need to really see that this body is, like we bear the burden of having this body that now gives us the, has all of these possibilities of us falling into craving and indulgence and so forth. And this is a very negative side of having a physical body. But there are positives too on the positive side. So it's not, we do need to see the downfalls of having a physical body, but not simply the downfalls, because there are, really some upsides to this. There are the advantages is that it is through having this very body that we commit virtue, and that we can, train, so, and then actually gain enlightenment. We can become enlightened beings. We can engage ourselves due to this, precious human body that we have. We can have the trainings of exchanging self for others that are virtuous and so forth. So there are both downsides and upsides of having this body. Aryadeva has said in the 400 verses that
Lunin rather told me can tell her when a Lusung Jas. Lula Kundaltan and Ranaji Tonguyanayang, Lita Sungu race. Karzana Lute, thank you, come out to be your Wasilagore.
And so what Aryadeva says in the 400 verses is, on one side we see this body, this physical body as an enemy, and yet even though we see it as an enemy, we must protect it, because it is this body that has the 18 freedoms and endowments that through which we can actually become enlightened beings, accomplish the state of Buddhahood. And therefore we should protect this body. And so, we see both. There are more faults than there are positives that come along with this body, but in the positives that we see, what we see is what we can accomplish through having this vehicle of this body that is, this precious human body that is so difficult to obtain. We see all of the virtue and positivity that we can create and accomplish with this body.
Yeah, that was Kunsantango.
So maybe we take a break here. Okay.
You drinking wine? You the sepeke minimi tagarangre ingu. Ta gadang dunchitonga bate. Tetar tunga ti yang de pesandi tamjeki zoprnipa yemina ti indepas Fijinus, Tangato Karsore. Lila Hachang Chedichin, and a pair, doing the soba, Chedi Mambo Chidney, and it's Seba, the Peggy Peggy, the Bada Peggy Rudiga, and it Tangi Longet, Tamchik, the Bada Tayomar, Zoya Junior said that, and the Bala. The Pape, Numia Yomar, the Bazoya Yomaris. The Indian Chikmazo Karsore. Samjin Choshi check with the Misvacation Borilla Sungor Tartuna. The Dinala Altampo Diloda. Any Penna any Kurgu. Do a Gaboregina, any Quran Garuji Wangurtane, oh, dang a Wangurins, and Kurgini Pasumbaji Bas, Mambu Wangada, Mata gathers a Tagaroa, the Bala Tamenza, and it's such a Jigi Sachiza, Yakachinichi Zagidwa. But then in the Bala Kunchubor, the Bala Tayomar, the Bada enemy. Garujini, Mazo, Centapna Kaguna Yaya, Resid Sungorda.
And in verse number 175, it reads, "For those who sink to such a pass, the earth and all it holds are powerless to satisfy. for who can give them all they crave. So when it comes to these, craving of the sense pleasures, we just want and want and want, and then we become attached to, obsess over, and want more and more. There's really no end. Actually, our greed and wanting to that which we have come to which we crave, there's no exhaustion, there's no end. We're never satiated. And so it's very, very important that we learn to set limits for ourselves, and that we learn the art of contentment, to be content and really draw the line and say, okay, this is enough. Ultimately, we really have to be able to come down and really set that line for ourselves, saying, this is enough. I will be content with just this much. If we think about, for example, like kings, within this, our samsaric and worldly sense, these like kings that want to rule over, different lands, and what exactly is their domain and isn't. So they capture and then are the ruler of one particular land, so this is now their land, and then they lay siege to further lands because they want to rule over this land as well, until everything is under their rule. They just keep going and going, never satisfied with what they have already, have. And so it's really important that we learn to really set, to set very clearly our limits and say, okay, enough. This is enough wanting. I've got enough. This is good. And, I'm fine with this. And that's very, very important. So this is verse 175. Do we have Janice other translation?
The Wallace version. When it has degenerated in this way, not even this earth can completely fulfill its desire. Who will then satisfy its desire? And the Bachelor. Having fallen in this way, if my desires are unable to be fulfilled, even by everything upon this earth, what else will be able to satisfy them?
다 디페 아본 얍선자면 되나 리송도 더 받아라 얍선자면 저나 추 남기 남도양 야송몬버 민주데스 미페 추퉁도 시부요겐디라 야소퉁나 곰나 야소퉁나 곰에요 마레스 더 받아 텐다 보지레스 대신 더파 텐제나 제행몬버 민주로스 야소 조나 곰에요 마레스 신다 짜다 랍세캬 mening mingyurjing tejin de patenjena de pelonjo ngomicha se to sungdo medi shuni kurgo te gyurje tichena pe di ago shimendo lamrim nala yoang aso paginala jini gi chonala de pachungla choshe ba se de sungyo pe misbe ke chemborda ngazo mangcheji ta pecho tang miduye gi yusa enin 유대 가르진 부자네 클라송 애니 양선 두지 지기도 그거 여봐야지 내는 늦은 초시제네 수석고 곧다다 그거 여봐냐 남자들이 샘데페 그게 쳐라봐 가서 꼴투비지 떼주나 약속을 때려도
아니 슝 아니 페체 카레네 디더바기
얍신 잘wen도
라서
주 남기 남동양 야송문 버민교로스 답에 주 망보 주대 망보 여나네 야소도 체셔로 와 아니 미 둥도겐지 답에 다 더바데 더바데 답에 출은 더바 용인지 야소 투나고메요 마레스 대신 더밥에 타요 말아서요 말았어. 아니 매 하장 강한지 신다 짜다 사트 단체에 매 사네 두비는데 매기 된 더밥 오메요 말았어. 대기다 네 대신 더밥 생지는 더벨론저 몸이 민용생도와 더벨론저 몸이 균이요 말에 타요 말으려고 그랬다나. 네 구구도 수수체까지 하고 오면도 그린다 상인이라 켜버 상인 물려요 가서 겨와 치마도 물려 용기야 하고 말와 때문에로 와 가서 겨와 치마다 겨와 치마다 아니 상인이 강원도 용기야 가서 시기어 말와 근데 맛이 간다 단 더바 망부지 더바 지마도 손조 망부지야 돼 그 제가 있다면도 어떻은 거래
Hola, so di chui ante disroboto di shingi kola kare sungido do nanga shingi kola.
신당 자양 랍세 강스 신당 자당 여러와. 그래서 배 세번서 칸 탐제 랍도 세 이나 메기에 배 너바데 몸이에요 말해지 미리지라. 미기 메. 메 제.
Yeah.
어다 때나진지 너바 템바이나 아니 배 너베 타베 조야요 말했어. 인디가라. 너바데라 아니 배 the bachungwa choshe bajugure so zungwar don danging bole di bagi lamrim nala diore jine to be toyore jine to be tonala the bachung choshe ba sunim zamate zu tini yore
Hola, so
telona yabore di kiran zo lo tantine pe yabore ta te zo pe ngone yabore
And in regards to being greedy, being very wanting, also there, the Buddha himself has spoken about this, and it is written in the sutras, where the Buddha says that having greed and being wanton is like, although the ocean is great from drinking its water, one never finds satisfaction. Satisfaction cannot be found, just as one cannot exhaust the amount of wood and dirt and rocks upon the land. One finds no contentment. And this is very true. When we become in a cycle where we're very greedy, very wanting, we just keep getting and wanting and getting, we actually get more than we need. And what we find is some of what we get just goes to waste because we've gotten too much, it goes bad, and then we actually have to get it again. And so this is a very wasteful cycle. And so therefore, we have to really examine what's happening with this greediness, with this wanting. It's, almost, like this inner need that, can't be, isn't quenched, but also isn't sensible. So we have to think and use, our practical and sensible mind in thinking about how much of something do we really need practically, and just have that much, have just what's sufficient. Because, this greediness won't be quenched in this life, and this greediness and wantonness will just flow into the next life where we're just as greedy if we don't learn to be satisfied and content now. And as it's also said in the scriptures, that we really don't know what's coming next, tomorrow or the next life. And as that's the case, we need to learn now to cultivate a way of being in that we have little wants and needs, and that we're easily satisfied and content. And also within the trainings of shamatha, of single-pointed meditation, within the preparation and trainings of cultivating single-pointed meditation, shamatha, cultivating the attitude of wanting little and being satisfied and content with whatever one has is part of the very training. So we can read about that in that sutra, and Geshe-la said he will send that to me so that I can translate it more accurately and fully. And he also said that within, look within the lamrim or stages of the path texts within the chapter on ethical discipline in regards to shamatha, and you'll find more more writings and explanation on cultivating an attitude of wanting very little and being satisfied with whatever one has. And these are very, very important mind states to cultivate.
Tangbo. Oh, the login a permissible salver than Jini sort to permissible abore. Oh, the Jini tonala, the opportunity choice about the permissible salvosumore. And it's Sudim Tapa, the zo.
Sudim Tapa Gido.
Oh, Sudim Tapa then Jini sorry. Jini to Vala, Sudim Tama Masuna, Jini to be a two to go Marwa. That is Okangape, Jinegi, Twinkin Sungor, the country 2 yore. Dopape, the bitch in the lens, Dopalangomeo, my lensituna, the Lalensudumina yoa. Lensituna, Dopa Pelgin Romata, Lensituna, Comba Pelgin or Com Tanga Marwa. Saju, Lenza and a Tarit, Saju Duina, Pe Combat Com Chirchirundure, Com Sele Yomare. What I'm the but thinking then thinking the thing that they gudu, they goods and Ganga Gugo against Shagore. So they Pechatay Yomar Luigi Mother Mea.
And so in the context of the stages of the path of Pabanka liberation in the poem of your hands, then within chapter 5, within the writings and explanation on meditative concentration, it speaks about the aids or helpful factors, aiding factors of single-pointed meditation, where within single-pointed meditation, developing discipline, within developing discipline to be able to accomplish Shinei or single-pointed meditation, then contentment and being wanting, being someone who is like wants very little and satisfied with whatever one has, is said to be one of the concordant factors to single-pointed meditation. And so you could look specifically there within the 5th chapter of Liberation, the palm of your hands. And also within the 37 practices, it speaks about the same process of when we start in a cycle of like a greedy wantonness where there is no end to like wanting to get more and more. Within the 37 practices, it says sensual pleasures are like salt water. The more you drink, the more the thirst increases. Therefore, abandon at once those things which breed clinging attachment. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. And so in this verse, in the 37 practices, it talks about these pleasurable things, or these things that we want and keep getting more and more of. They're like salt water. And that's the nature of salt water. You take and you want some of it, and you get it. And the very nature of salt water is it makes you want more. It feeds the wanting more. And so the same thing with our attachment to things and our greediness to like want to possess things. And, you know, we just want, the minute we want possess one thing, we want more. And so we must be very much on guard of of this. And also it's, you know, it's not useful. So like the water that we drink doesn't serve the purpose to fill the need that we're trying to fill, which is to satisfy the thirst. And the same thing with the greed. That which we're getting doesn't really, it isn't useful. It doesn't fulfill the need. And therefore it's just an endless cycle.
Nimen ta dunju tundu ko kangpa tangpo ni de tanda di dina yongu do lugi sepe nimi nangla yongu do kangpa tangpo ni de nimen depe nyamong tang samba nyambar kebar gyurur sede tate tsi tekniki karso na depa tin namya zoya yomares zoya me inza ko nim pe nipa tuya yomara nime singdin dopa zoya yomara nipa meba chan dijindu dopa kaso ene dijeba ena ene chajen todo ani pe pelin chagres tendi indi gewe digi kenjine gewe samba ene nyambar chigres tarwa de dijidu ngazo gewe chola kumba legi koro marwa oda tendi indi gala nyambar gewe ne imi dewa pelgres se makiba manga chagre dopa chisam dopa cheteso se makiba da manga yorda ngazo taje tanda ti tembare imi dewa se makiba da teni yungu orwa tenga so control chego da teso la toso tanzin chego da pe miswe kechimbore tede pordo ta lule se benimi de la kanche chologa ni de chekanduwa.
아니 야당 dunju.
야당 dunju tuntu pa kampa tangpunyi de.
Okay. And so, you know, this is a very important thing for us to look at, right? This like cycle of our craving. And once we give into our craving, our just not serving, it doesn't fulfill us. And so we just want more and more. And actually there's no end to this. And it you know, it can't be exhausted. Our wanting won't be exhausted in this way, however much we partake of these different things. It does not fill that hole. It does not satisfy the need. It actually feeds the wanting more and more. However much we have, to that extent, we just want, you know, the liking it, the wanting to possess it, the craving for it just increases. And due to this condition, our virtue declines. The virtue that we're involved in when we're involved in such a cycle, our virtue declines. Because we won't, when this is consuming our mind, when consuming things, possessing things is all that's on our mind, we won't think about the side of virtue. And then also, you know, we're not happy. You know, if we really look at it, if we really do some soul searching here, we'll see it's true. We're not happy when we're in such a cycle. And so we need to turn this around. You know, so we have to understand that because of the physical, the things that our physical body wants and gets attracted to and then obsesses over, it gets like addicted to and attached to, we're so unhappy mentally. We're never satisfied physically. And, you know, so this is something that we have to analyze, this process of what's happening when we get caught in such a cycle of these hopeless cravings. As it says, we're never happy with it. These hopeless cravings bring us nothing but misery. And so this is the first two, this is the first two lines of verse 176, where it reads, "Their hopeless cravings bring them misery, and evil schemes invade their minds." And do we have other translation?
Sure. In the Wallace, "For one who desires the impossible, mental affliction and disappointment arise.
다
And there's one.
삽쟁이 봐 류라 차트를 보면
Shandak
봐.
chik yore
La.
shua geshila ani
Oh,
shandak chik
Sorry.
ani dus.
okay.
In the Bachelor, being unable to fulfill them, though desiring to do so, disturbing conceptions and a dissatisfied mind will ensue.
Thank you.
디서
Doisona.
간제 쇼로가 니의 제가 도와. 다 류라 차트를 홈리 받을 쇼로가 지디 제가래. 두주리 두 강바 당보니당 두주리 뜸바 린주톤두 린주톤두 강바 당보니다 린주톤 림바데 다 차트를 홈리 바스 류라. 근데 리가라 다 너바치진 초셔버지네 애니베 근데게 세바단 달해야 돼. 홈 꼼바 기준 구글에서 순고하다. 와다 대순고하래. 간지 군날 때메파 데니 푼소 제미셰스 데위 리긴 더바니 펠징 갑절 미자데스 가시 용 민진바 데니 응오포 장보인 저순고다. 다데 가르순고하래 시디가라 간사 다 기부함 간사 기부제네 부르셔세거라 부르셔는 닐den 맞은 남주요ken 니바들 댕길라 세거라 기부제데 간 어다 텐디지 간시기 류 론절라 더반바라 너바 충진 초시 바세데 다 너바 충중 다 고코 여바 다 문에 따제다니 남주더니 가서지 고군도 망보지 가서 제대로 망보냐나 그 렘상 룰루다 툴란도샤도 와. 와다 때서 남쳤던 거라. 간지 가서지 자투비안도 가서지 권투비안도 디타다 셋다다 지냐. 페시 라마데 페샤란레 자샤이노 페셔루레요 말와. 와다 두스 테즈 페자고다. 테조리지네. 맞은 더바춘 아니페 더바춘라 초셔봐. 아니 초셔바지 지구고레스. 디중아이나 개와 강나도티 제바이나 다 수술아니 고고 분숨서 봐 연된 장보 디니 용그레스 연된 제미셰바 나면 론제 란 풍화대 용 말레스 론제 라 풍화진다 론제 땅아서 처음 빼 가서 인도바 여와데 빼져 땅한데는 남진에 빼셔서 그러라니 론저 풍루도와 얘는 론 빼셔대 두마투 에 여바데제 메바데 애니베 두마투 디가라 딱 강할 시부시 되기도와 왔다 뜻은 거래 루키 론저 세바나 님보 마테나 코네 콘도 펠그레스 근데 일라 이동와 너니 가서 초도 장보이노 세다다 너바 충을 초셔바드 때니 초셔바지디 빼 너는 장쇼데 이 뭐부 장쇼데 때레스 소선 도중 초셔지 고호여와제네 답에 다르투는 디시고래 빼 하장 잘 개보제네 빼 시부지 내 마인바 하장 껴봐 맞아봐 소소 빼 디설레 렘바제네 아니 빼에 지주ten야다 tezu kanga tape remba siltengore tape umel tawadere da lam uma sigiminde chopade uma chen rogorisi ta kanche tenim te minsibe yabodo atizu terita marazo yedigala cho masheveji debe yumangbo thalata 메디가라 ni pe nga me zene ni pe kabakasa chi lamdena debu yomarwa 강 여바데 마토르지 비다보지 아니 게 디트 라마데라 아니 수수 게웨 촐라 카초바치니 게와 두바지 어다도 스제 진로야지 숭거래 간제 차탈 홈리 바시디가 시부진 냄보 숭도와
Mm-hmm. And then the next, moving on, we have the last two lines in 176 and then 177 that speak to separating from the suffering that is related to our cravingness, to our compulsion to consume. And it reads, while those with free, untrammeled hearts will never know the end of an excellence. Therefore, for the increase of my body's wants, I'll give no space, no opportunity. And of possessions, those things are the best that do not captivate by their attractiveness. And so here it says, those free with untrammeled hearts. So this is an individual who is really using their brain to really be smart about their consumerism, about their consumption, about keeping themselves in check, and not overindulging. So, really not being greedy, and just keeping themselves very much in check, where they really, what they have in check is their wantingness and, their level of being satiated. They're really using, a very, like a practical and reserved, they're using their will, power, and so forth, really looking and, examining, how greedy am I? Am I over consuming? Do I consume so much that I then end up wasting? Or do I just want to like get so many books and so many things and so many texts and, overdoing it? And if so, understanding that and keeping it in check. And it's said that actually, like, being restrained about one's consumption is a very good quality, and good things will result from this, from being like reserved about one's consumption. Good things will result. And one also won't waste resources. So when we have too much, we waste resources. And when we have, when we don't, so someone who is not like that consumes too much, buys too much, amasses so much that resources are wasted. And then when they don't have all that they want, because they're not satisfied, with very little, they are, they suffer. It's problems. It's troublesome for them because they don't have. And when they do have, it's troublesome because they're wasting. And so what one should, an individual, here it says, untrammeled hearts. And this word in Tibetan here means someone who is carefree, who doesn't I have to have this much and I have to have this. And they're free of those bonds. They're really carefree about things. Oh, if I have it, it's okay. If I don't have it, it's okay. What we should look to have is what we need for that particular amount of time. What do we need for a week? What do we, if we're going out and purchasing, what do we need just to really get by for that week? And that's, that will do. And actually, it's a little bit like a less is more. The more we can get by with as little possible, like the better it is for us. And remember, we have also this middle way approach, and there's the practice of Madhyamaka, the middle way. And here we take, in all of our behaviors and activities, we should also take this middle way approach, which means not falling to either side, too little or too much, just enough, kind of, I don't know, maybe a little Marie Kondo, just what we need. And then we won't be wasting like possessions and material things and resources and so forth. And nor will we be falling to the side of, oh, I don't have anything, poor me, I've got nothing. So we want to stay just right in the middle, just what we need to get by, just what's sufficient, and be very happy. You know, make sure that what we have is good quality, and will serve the purpose for what we need, you know, to meet our basic needs, but we don't need any more than that, and we don't need any less than that. And actually taking that balanced approach, a restrained approach, but still enough, will set us in the place where we're set up to then whatever our behavior and activities around are virtuous. It sets us up for virtue, this balance, being balanced. And did we have other, I don't remember, Janice, did we read in? I don't think so. Last two of 176 and all of 177. Yeah.
Wallace, but for one who is free of expectations, there is unblemished prosperity. Therefore, free range should not be given to the growth of bodily desires. It is truly good when one does not take something that one wants. And in the Bachelor, but if I do not depend on any material things, the exhaustion of my good fortune will be unknown. Therefore, I shall never create an opportunity for the desires of the body to increase. For whatever I do not grasp as attractive, these are the best of all possessions.
Yeah, that big get chimburi. Get chimburi the kerset chendenani, Mambu, teach the Mambu Kagadwa. What that do sre, they indigala, that didn't digala jana madot, Kangat dosa mare, didn't digala ja, and cannot the Tua in the Tua Tantemana, Tagi Dome Colatosu, Tuatilan de Cheguayadu, Teji Chego.
So, you know, this is this kind of this strategy, or adopting this way of living, really cuts out a lot of, you know, we could say really cuts the fat out of a lot of things, our time, our waste. It really trims it all down. It saves a lot in a lot of areas. And Geshe-la said, so this is a good stopping point here in speaking about this, like this craving and so forth. So he's happy to take questions here. If there aren't any questions, there are more points that can be made about greediness and like over-consuming and this kind of a mindset. But if you have questions, please feel free to ask.
I might have another question.
Okay.
So early on in this discussion today, Geshe-la talked about the mind as being a neutral platform and saying that negative afflictions could be destroyed, but virtue then had to be increased. So I guess my question was about that is, does that mean that virtue then is not intrinsic to the mind?
Di re Geshe-la ani dane kirang di song ani samseri di ge ani samseri di lumatang nanshin re ani yana yang dela yang ani migewe choyore ani gewe choyang yore ani migewa di ngato di migul di migewe gi chok di chongore ani ngato di nyomong chongore mebaso gore ani dene gewa gi chok di ani yongne yongdu pelgores ani dela tane dis samoyana ani tata yana ani di gewa seriudi di sam nangla rangjingi yomare
Ranjingi Yonata,
Lenshiki, dine.
Lenshiki Mionata, Bezuchagumdo. Tina Bezuchagumara. Egawa Sinde, Kanchi, Egawa de Dipasi Villa, Caragor, Chawa de Generva, Chawa de Gene, Dibudumaki Gunati, Chawa de Dipare. Chawa Karjin, take Jenny, any Dumaki Guna, Dipare. Chawa Jenny, Gitani, Ranga, Rala, Kipo, Jenla, Devachungiana, Rajakana, Devachungina, Digi Jungiana, Ti Gavare. Cheta, Tini Indigala, Chambadan, Nijetan, Chanjuki Semtezo, Yaman switch Baina, Rajankanga, the King Jingrimado, Digi Dungan Jamidoa. Tende Indigala, the Motobegone. The Semgi and then Rel of Gore. Nambijunala. That's Sanyin Toyota, Semgi and then Rel Gore. And the
Can you
Indigala.
come in for a minute? Oh, sorry. Hello? Oh, that's cool. Geshala.
Ninja.
Okay.
Hey, Chunjunjidoa.
Okay. My granddaughter wanted to come for a visit.
Ninja.
Okay. Okay. Dene ngut di semgi yuntenre di
Semgi in then, Karjana, Mazu Makumra, the Komna, Kumba Tamet Pelgiorelare. What at the Indigala, Chick. Sem Koran Lumatenche, Semla Nipe, Pro Jambada Nijida, Revicho the Ting in the Gala, Sem de Gesemche. Sem de la Nipe, Migivicho, Docha, Jedan Kondro, Taranchin, Danzing Wangi, Tezun Gorwa. What at the Jichanani Migi Sem Chadware? What is the Kaza Zana, Kibu Kaza, Mi Kandijina, Mi Sidigala, Lumatenova. Mi then, me do getting to Tedigala, me the Chopaduja Charoda, Mizuga Red Lagua. Chantunge, and it Tamanya Tunge, and Chapa Ganging, you know, teach up at the Gwendrona, Mizuga Lagua.
Lasso, then ngone di chirpagi colore, di panamidan samgi colomare, di chirpagi.
Chopa the Chipawata, co the Tenajinita, Petenajin. Any me, any be. Me Zambuchin him to Zambuchin him to me the Zambuchado. Then I sing Semdian, Chupa any pay Chanjuki Semda, then did you then Yamdo Dana, send the any Chanjuki Sem Chad water, Chambe Sem Chad water, Niji Sem Chad water, Chupangamba Jananda, send the any pay Semgamba Chad water. Did that?
And so, no, actually, it's not intrinsic. It's not intrinsic to the mind, because, you know, we really have to work at it, right? You know, this is something that we have to spur ourselves on to virtue. So it's not innate. This is something that just doesn't naturally come about. It's not always there. This is something that we really have to, you know, work at. And so basically what's being identified when we speak about something that's wholesome or unwholesome or positive or negative is it's about the activity that comes about. So for example, when we speak about something that's unwholesome, we think about this kind of a pattern. There's an activity, there's like some kind of, you know, action done. And then, you know, the result of that is it brings something unsatisfactory in the person who does it and the person around them. So something negative to the situation. So when there's an activity And the ensuing result is it brings some difficulty to the people around the agent of that activity, to the agent themselves. We identify that as unwholesome or non-virtue. And on the flip side, when it comes to virtue, so again, yes, Geshe-la said that, the platform of the mind is one thing, but what we're talking about when we talk about virtue and non-virtue are the karmas, the actions. So then if, someone, the agent, someone does something and it brings happiness to the person doing it, it brings happiness or benefit to the situation around them, then that particular action or behavior is identified as virtuous because it brought happiness to the person and to the people around them. And so when we talk though about we call we identify what's called the qualities in the mind, and when we identify qualities, those are positive qualities. These are positive qualities that we want to, as you said, we want to increase. And the things that we want to increase more and more, like that feed like these, activities, are love and compassion and caring and concern and consideration. Those are things we want to increase. And then the things that we want to get under control or, destroy and overcome are self-centeredness, hatred, and anger. Because these are the things that lead to what we were saying before as like unwholesome actions or non-virtue. The individual themselves are, this is the individual, like when we talk about a person, let me come sit. When we talk about a person, then, we're talking about someone who is, the individual. To the individual, there is this neutrality. Like when we talk about a person, it's the emotions and the actions that can be positive or negative, virtuous or non-virtuous. So again, we're looking at the actions, and the positive actions that we're looking to increase are a bodhicitta and compassionate mind. So did that answer? But Geshe-la did, shortly say that virtue is not intrinsic to the mind. So did that answer your question, William? And so, we have the so ani di Geshe-la ani
linki sem sidgala link sem gi rajinde linki su yore selare the sem tamojil de this pet tamore
really okay
ela linki gi sem tape linki gi yoba shigore
la so okay pelcher kongi triwa di yang ani pelcher ani di conditioner pelcher di yang ani pengi yogere di ninje dang jampa dang ani di ani samla lenki yo ani yona
ten yo mari te yo na da zo che gu mdo lenki yo mari tang nga zum bechu thone di tat di karchore di sapon zo ni ta geje ge samba yorwa pacha zo di sapon thamo di yore tadi pe meada nga zo lenki gi meada pe lenki segor tate pacha da ji yegir ma ta te di na koram pe semlai rajin ranchi su yo na nga zo gawa zo che go ek tem yong marwa pacha pe numbu yongin de zo ni pe gi chi go do 간증 아주 좋아지고 그들 그뒤 좋아지는 두 어디가라 솔직히 용와 절매기 용와서데 용와데 냠용데는 빼 망부시 딘디 림바 송구도 맞아 좋아지고 합니다
And so, you know, Geshe-la was furthering to explain that, you know, there is the intrinsic like consciousness that comes together with mind. This is, you know, so we have this intrinsic consciousness of our mind. And so this is our very subtle mind that we have discussed before, the actual like state of mind that is just pure mind. So I asked Geshe-la, is part of that pure mind is compassion, things like compassion and caring and empathy, are those intrinsic to that mind? And he said, no, those are not, or we wouldn't need to like work to develop them. However, there, you know, there are karmic imprints, you know, that do influence the mind. So within that intrinsic mind, nature of mind, we can have karmic imprinting where something can be like our experiences impact our mind, and therefore we have these karmic imprinting. And that's why sometimes something is effortless. We don't have to put any effort into it. This means we have you know, karmic imprinting for that we have already like established. And some things take longer, you know, they actually take effort. And so we're, you know, establishing, experience establishes karmic imprints.
So which has one?
Was that clear?
I think so, yeah. I hesitate to take it to the next level of what I'm thinking. But.
Mm-hmm.
Stuart posted a question on the chat.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I have a follow-up to William's question. While it is worthy to work for others' happiness, is it more important to work for their equanimity?
Mm-hmm. More important. Ani pena seme shi nangla ani pena samchan tamche dewa yudang drawa gyorchik di chikre samlo chikre ani tang ani di dewa tang di tang yom dang drawe ki dewa ani konso gi dewa kalcheware yang mena konso la tang yom Europe yudang dralwa
lo jangtu ganla tanyum de ke cheshore tanyum de majuna any be ranchola cha jenchola dangje dewa seme dang chamba seme dang ni seme de tu ya koran ya mare lo tangbo tu the tanyum seme de ke cheshore tanyum seme tu bi na any be tinin chamba seme da niji seme da gawa seme tu ra te ma do tanyum seme tu ma tu bodu ti tu ya koran ya mare lo jangbe karla tanyum seme de ke cheshore.
So in the beginning, actually, when one is training, the very most important thing, so like within the mind training, when we're really looking to condition our minds and like train our minds to be like in all these four immeasurables, right? So we have the four immeasurables, and yeah. And so the most important thing of all is equanimity when we're doing the training of mind, because we're looking to establish you know, unlimited love and happiness, you know, and equanimity. So these four immeasurables. Well, the very first thing we have to learn is to see, you know, to see all as worthy. So equanimity. So to wish somebody like equanimity is the most important thing, because you can't develop immeasurable love, immeasurable happiness, immeasurable compassion, or joy without some kind of an equanimity, because otherwise you're bias, you know, based or partial based. So the very most important thing in the beginning is equanimity.
Thank you.
Yeah. 교조 되는 장돔 랭겐 가져요. 윤도 장돔 랭겐 초가 장돔 랭겐 옆에 메스.
단다.
윤도 장돔 랭겐 초가 그냥 겨울 무제 나는 zon데 랭겐 옆에스.
So how many people have taken the Bodhisattva vows? Like how many people, like for example, His Holiness bestowed the Bodhisattva vows a while ago, but I guess just basically how many have taken Bodhisattva vows? Maybe raise your hands. I don't know if Geshe-la can see everyone.
I think I have. I'm not certain. Are we talking about the teaching he gave in June?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, His Holiness, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, 아니 펠시아 다와 아니 let's see June 다와 drukpegi kachudi nangla kirang dekorla 아니 승기여나 Geshe-la.
지단다 라마치가는 라나 소수땡이 투네 레나 니거와.
Yeah, from
장돔 렌니 렘바이나 대pe 숭자데도 숭제도 스제네 야루 누구라.
Oh, lasso. Yeah. So from whomever, I think Geshe-la was, he mentioned that His Holiness did give them, but from whichever lama that you have taken them from, or whichever guru, if you have, taken the vows of, of Bodhisattva, Bodhicitta, the Bodhisattva vows, then, as we uphold those vows, then, we just improve our conduct around those vows and those trainings, because a lot of what we're like discussing is related to those vows.
근데 내가라다 드린다 다 뒤쳐서
The reason I asked that is because when the Dalai Lama gave the teaching, it was so fast that it was a little unclear what was happening from stage to stage. Yeah. So because it was an empowerment to practice Shinrezig, my understanding was that it included the Bodhisattva vows, but it wasn't explicit to me that that's what was happening at the time.
Well,
so
I did, listen to that teaching. So I will tell Geshe-la what you said, but I did listen to that. I was online for that also, and there was a recitation at the very beginning. That the translator, so I'm sure people listened in English, that the translator recited something. His Holiness was in the background, and the translator recited 3 times the same words. And so if you were listening and saying those along, that was the Bodhisattva vow ceremony.
It was my intention that would be the case, but I wasn't certain if that was the
Kongi ani di vow di domba di jangdom konso len malen kong ani tenden mes kangin sena dedu di gyalwa rinpoche gi kachu di nyene ani di jangdom ani di nangla o di jangdom lenya gi kapre di sirpo machongsa yana tanda na di Jangdom ani yurme nga tenden mes.
That's tenden mena tublu maki didi be dugu jogudo du segdo yarumchina. Didi ta dugu jodi didi o tublu yabuji kematu ina tini lamaji nana susu tublu maki ne tubu mare.
So there was a period in the ceremony where His Holiness snapped his fingers. And yes, I remember this now. And at the time that you snap, when you snap the fingers, then when he snapped his fingers, then that's when you visualize or recognize, oh, now I have the vow. And if you did that at that time, then you took the vow and have the vow. Dene di kapsu tanda ngala ani
jangdom top song samda tublu ke sungdo
Samlo makena dene tobyo mare.
가버래. 왕이난다 답에 장동이나다 뜻 강가 톱로 마게는 두고 주디가라 톱로 야보지게 못비나데 가버래.
Yeah. So I asked Geshe-la if, you know, if you didn't have that thought, oh, now I have the vow. If you don't have that thought, does that mean you don't have it? And he said, probably not. It's difficult to say, but whether it's an empowerment or taking a pledge of something, you must have the mental recognition, now I've taken the vow, or now I have the empowerment. So otherwise, you didn't receive it.
Well, I felt that about the empowerment, but I wasn't sure about the vow, so I'm kind of in a gray area, I guess.
Dene tanda kong yurme unintended mesa.
Yeah.
But I mean, I accept it if that's the case.
톱로 게 못비나 가버래.
Yeah, he repeated that unless there was a mental recognition, a point of mental recognition at that moment, I now have taken the vow, I now have the vow, that it would be very difficult to say that you did.
Okay.
같이 이 좀발렌 내야 초가돼서 준주나나 요래 류니바 차장지로 아니 류숨바게 쇼로가 야당 니슈자니다 자숨니데 다 좀발 내가 초공마데 땡이래 준주나라
Gyadang
니슈
Sumchu
야당 말에 니슈자니 자숨
Oh, right, so that's all.
가사 류숨바게 장주기 샘송의 리운도와 류니슈
Sachik Sani
니슈자니 자숨니데 좀발레 중외데 테레
Lasso.
디티오 니다 중데도 샘 징테야라 다 장주기 샘 귤레케네 수수 가오고미야드레 가오고미야 디디도 당난 디그레 테니 바게 장주 샘자름 부체데 겨난 디그레 테니 다 바게 가르사와 우마린젠 타웨나라 디도아 지신 남간에 받은 로아티시 니기네 모일리우나 데요레 지신 남간에 받은 로아 지신 니기데 지신 나 다견에 기네 로이둥아 세월셔서데 모일리우나 요레 어때때 저게 징터난 디고레 징터에서도 가오고 메야드레 대대기 띠노 렌타베 제가 난데 벤도아 디고 강가 징터에 티페 망부도 같아 또 강가 가르치 티 가르충난 디고레
Lasso dene tangpo dene
좀 장주기 샘송의 답에 domba 내게 생음마데 지상 문제 대시에 장주 투니 키어봤다 장주 섭에 라발라 때다리 내봤다 다견 롤라 펜도도 장주 섭니 계기지 장주 섭에 라발라 림바전도 라퍼기즈데 솔로가 니데 땅음마데 다디 전주 지되게 답에 장좀 라다 가르스고래 문주 지저도 중에 답에 장좀 내기 중데디레
di gonda di jong di chen kare
전주기 솔로가 야다 니슈타숨
Lasso. Okay, yeah, disopodo. Okay, so
문주 지저도 내기 중데 다디
dire, yeah.
디레
Okay.
원샘당 주좀 니가래야 딱 하가제나 아니 가가제 제누 디나라 살포송도 간에서 가가 제고 먹어든 디나 살포송
Oh my gosh, he's taking out his big book. Okay. So, Geshe-la,
제가 뒤쳐지게라 가서 망루제네 잘데 주고와
아니 Geshe-la kongi korangi pena di tanka gi donla yamena kundra gi donla dene sik di 아니
티딘데 당고 샥바 야보니 제샥 연라 듬반데 연라 듬베가네 연라 듬반은 르메기 연라 듬바이나다 카레나 연라 듬바데 차제 그지 수수 지고는 누구면아 삼려나는 연라 듬데 차가 차지제 샤바 야보지제 눈라니베 투앙 살때
Lasso.
와도 두센 데니 지상기 대샤기 대수결구라.
Okay, yeah. So I have the actual refuge, like the text over in the closet. I can get it if we need, but maybe we don't. So Geshe-la is saying that actually, so, you know, the actual verses that are used to bestow not refuge, I'm sorry, Bodhisattva vows and to receive Bodhisattva vows are in the, you know, the way of the Bodhisattva. And I don't have my red book here with me, but they're in there. And what you would do, so first of all, he said in chapter 2, you know, you can read chapter 2 to really get inspired and, you know, spirited and like really pumped up about, you know, the Bodhisattva vows. And in chapter 3, you know, read chapter 3. And when you get to verses in chapter 3, 21, 22, and 23. And
21, Mare. 22, 22, 23.
Just 22, 23. Sorry. Verses 22, 23 in chapter 3. Those are the actual like words of taking the Bodhisattva vows. And so you know, also, you know, so these words about bodhicitta that get one really inspired to take it up as a way of life, to take it up as their new mission. You can find these in Precious Garland of the Middle Way. You can find them in the Way of the Bodhisattva here, which we have. And then we also have verse number 55, which is in this book in the chapter on dedication, verse 55, as long as space endures, as long as sentient beings remain, may I too so remain to dispel the sorrows of the world. When you read words like that, they touch the heart and inspire one to really take on bodhisattva vows. And so I asked Geshe-la, and also he, you know, so this is actually, I asked, so are you saying that William or any of us could just take bodhisattva vows, you know, alone? And he said, yes. He said, what you would do is first do a confession practice. So do like confession and the 7-branch offering. So we have the 7-branch, you know, offering. And then visualize, so you could be in front of a statue or in front of a tanka, or visualize, you know, the enlightened beings, the Buddhas and enlightened beings in front of you, and you're taking these vows in their presence. And then you would recite this 22 and 23 and take the vows.
Sumba ne pe rimbaji do lapargi zede sar sumba lamne rimbaji do lapargi zede gala ta suzugi le monsamji munjuji jar do giri samde kesongem da samlo ta pe janjugi sam kesong da samlo do korgore da ta tini tuiso zo do to chuzu tuba jin so de modo munju khaga je chi de zo jama jang zo kha ti ko la ka je she go zo wa.
So is that the same as the vow renewal script?
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure, but so what? So at what point Geshe-la said that in reciting these lines in the Way of the Bodhisattva that you would now think, I've got the vow, is right. So it says, I will welcome, you know, all, you know, I will welcome all sentient beings, just as all the bodhisattvas of the path have followed. I also will accomplish the, you know, the stages of the past, just as the bodhisattvas have in the past. And that's the point where you think, I now have the vows. And so now so Geshe-la says, and so now we're out of time. And he said there's also a way to just take the aspirational bodhicitta. There's the like the ritual or the words that are recited when you're taking aspirational bodhicitta, or you can take them both together, because it's sometimes in, like there's some systems where first you take aspiration bodhicitta vows and then you, ala. Oh,
semke na munsem ke ya tamjachen munsen tamjachen semke gi na sangi chodomande ani tega thoni semke na digore.
and it would be appropriate for you to take the, you know, use the words of like aspiration bodhicitta, taking up aspiration bodhicitta while visualizing yourself in the presence of the Buddhas. That you could also, that would be a very appropriate way for you to take the vows.
Yeah, that didn't.
Diane?
Okay.
Could someone else double check? Because from my notes, it was chapter 3, verses 23 and 24. 23 and 24.
Yeah. Does anyone else have the book? And Geshe-la's saying, so let me see, if you're looking chapter, and let me know.
Me can't see the issue in Kurgo, 23 na 24 ina.
Okay. Yeah, so Geshe-la said he'll send it. We'll pin it down. I'm sorry, I have the book on my computer and I can look at the same time as we're here, but it just might take me a moment. And I think we're out of time. So Janice, can you read me what you have for 23 and 24?
Sure.
Just quickly.
Just as all the Buddhas of the past have brought forth the awakened mind, and in the precepts of the Bodhisattvas, step by step, abode and trained, likewise, for the benefit of beings, I will bring to birth the awakened mind, and in those precepts, step by step, I will abide and train myself.
Okay, that's the verse that Geshe-la said. That's when you're taking the vow. So was that 23?
That was 23 and 24.
Okay, what was 22?
22 is, thus for everything that lives, as far as are the limits of the sky, may I be constantly their source of livelihood until they pass beyond all sorrow.
You're right. It was in whichever version you were reading, it was the first thing that you read. Okay, ta Drisong Geshe-la.
Yeah.
Oh, lasso. Yeah, and Geshe-la said there's another ritual that he has that he will send to me. And if it's useful for people, yeah, so I'll probably, I can send it to, I can put it up on the Facebook when I can. And if you send me your email, I could also email it to you if you're not on Facebook.
Yeah. Chanchu Samjo Rimboche, Maki Pana, Kinguchi, Kawa Nyamba, Mepayang, Kone, Kondo, Pewaras, Karira, Kurvation Gande, Penda Deva, Malinju, Nature, Tenzing, Jabe, Side, Porto, Thanguruchi, Jambal Pave, Chilter, Kembatan, Kundo Zampote, and Teta Kungages of the Lodger, Gawan, the Tatam, Rotung, to soon should be Gawatan, Kalacho, Padan, Tajan Kave, Sawan.
Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it has not been born, may it arise. Where it has been born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. And the land encircled by snow-white mountains, the source of all happiness and benefit, flows in your person, Chenrezig Tenzin Gyaltso, remain until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri obtained omniscience and Samantabhadra too, so now I dedicate these merits to train and follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future praise dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate these sources of my merit for all beings to perfect good actions.
Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good to see everyone. Thank you, Geshe-la.
Thank you.
Take good
Bye-bye,
care,
thank you.
everyone.